Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for today's Comics Creator Chat. I've got two amazing guests hanging out with me today to talk about the second volume of their new graphic novel series adapting the classic Dracula myth. So it is my pleasure to introduce comics legends, and if there was a comics fantasy team, they would both be on mine, Matt Wagner and Kelley Jones. How are you both doing mid-campaign? Funding looks like it's going pretty well.
Yeah, going great. Great. And more importantly, we're still both just on fire for this project. You know, this project came about as a result of Kelley and I have known each other for over 3 decades, and we always said to each other, "Hey, we got to do something together someday." And we knew we meant something, a big thing, something significant, not just a little one-off or something. And finally, several years ago, after a similar sort of exchange, I contacted him directly and said, "Hey, man, are you serious? Because I've been brewing on this idea about Dracula for a long time, and I think that would fit us both like a glove." And luckily, hit Kelley at just the right time and hit me at just the right time, and we were both able to commit to it. Because it's, we're doing 4 volumes at least, so it's 5 years or so of effort,
Well, we could never have done it earlier anyway, because the way we're doing it, no publisher could. They would have a hard time.
Right.
With it. And that in and of itself is a wonderful thing, is that, doing it, at least for me, I never sit down and it's like, to Matt's point about still having the real excitement of doing it, is I never think each day, oh, I got to get through this, or I got to do that, or whatever. It's what will happen today. And if I'm doing that, I just assume the reader's doing that too. What's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been and Kelley shares this, I know, it's always been our kind of mantra so far as creators go, is it has to be thrilling for us first before it's going to be thrilling for our readership,
Sure.
And you come into every project and you want to feel thrilled. You want to feel thrilled with the act of creating something, and this really is thrilling for both of us. We are
I think
when it just hits all the notes,
Yeah, I think Matt writes the best individual scenes that link to each other. So when you're reading the first one, it just mounts and mounts and mounts. And I think that when you put a reader through a very believable place and you're entertaining the whole time, that's a rare thing to do. Matt doesn't say one idea and then we'll wait to see the revelation at the end. It's like ideas and ideas and ideas all the way through. And that's fascinating. And when you're drawing it, I never feel like I know these are big, long projects, but I don't feel that way. I always see him in these segments that he does. And that translates to reading it. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big vampire fan, like a lot of people are. I did a reread prepping for the interview the other night and kind of bookended the Impaler, flipping through some Simon Marsden photos before bed. Are either of you familiar with Simon Marsden or know who he is?
No.
Okay. Yeah, check his stuff out online. He's an English photographer who specialized in these surreal black and white landscapes of haunted houses and locations throughout Europe.
I do think I know that. Yes, I know him. He did something where they used it for an M.R. James thing. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, and everything was in infrared that he shot. So it created these really, really strong highlight spaces in areas that otherwise wouldn't have them. And he was shooting during the day, so the infrared film will capture that heat. So it's a lot of stuff with statues. And what it did is it created a weird, moody depth that people just hadn't seen, because the perspective of where the highlights landed were very, very different. And you felt like you were in one realm and out of the other. Yeah, he had a book called Vampires: The Twilight World, which has images of Romania and like lesser known spots like the Isle of Dread and Venice and stuff. But it's cool stuff if you guys get a chance to check it out.
Sure.
Well, that's, you mentioned there about things people hadn't seen before. That's, of course, one of our challenges with this is, everybody feels they already know Dracula top to bottom. It's pretty well trodden material, And like I said, I had been kind of stewing on this idea. Vampires have shown up in my work a lot over the years in Grendel. And I always wanted to try my hand at the OG vampire, you know. And
Sure.
I just couldn't get a handle on it. And then finally I figured out, oh, the handle is we don't tell the novel. We take all the little tiny hints and tantalizing bits of information, and we expand on those. We tell all the stories around the novel. So our series here we will not be doing an adaptation of the novel. You will not see the events of the novel. No Jonathan Harker's trip to the castle, no Van Helsing, no Mina, no Lucy. And there's still plenty of material for us to tell because of, again, how mysterious Stoker keeps the Dracula character in the book itself, because he's not on screen all that much in the book. You know, in the first scene in the castle, he's there quite a bit. Once he gets to London, he's just kind of this shadowy presence that the heroes are chasing after all the time.
And I don't think anyone would want to see us just do a straight up adaptation anyway.
Yeah.
I think
it's
after
good,
they see
they've
these,
done that, you know, not only many times in film, but a ton of times in comics too. You know,
I
there's
say
no reason to go there.
certainly after you see Impaler and then read Brides, that would be a letdown to just simply see a retelling of the novel then.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's done it and we've seen it all before, and it's like a great song in a concert. Everyone's mouthing the words as you do it. So this will be something utterly different, and as it has been, and I think that's going to be its authenticity. Is this will be a completely unique Dracula experience, yet it's Dracula. We're not making up stuff.
Yeah.
Matt certainly isn't adding anything to it. He's just doing who's there.
Yeah, we're sticking strictly to the book. You know, for instance, Volume 1, The Impaler, is all about how he becomes a vampire.
Yep.
And in the book, I noticed that, you know, we don't see many other vampires in the book, but none of them seem to exhibit the extraordinary powers he does, controlling the weather and commanding animals and a variety of other things. And Stoker mentions twice in the book, via Van Helsing expounding about vampires to the heroes, that Dracula attended something called the Scholomance, which is a Romanian legend of this seminary for the dark arts that Satan himself hosts up in the mountains. And I was just like, why has nobody ever done anything with that? That's the possibilities are very deep for narrative.
Well,
there, you know?
and Matt had told me once, he says, you know, when you're talking about the novel, we only focus on the one box of Earth. There's 49 other boxes of Earth he deposited God knows where.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh yeah, you're right. Matt does a lot of those. Oh yeah, you're right. You know, I remember reading the novel and I remembered it's a paragraph or so of him going to the Scholomance, and you just breeze by it because he doesn't do anything more with it.
Yeah.
And Matt turned
that.
I
mean, my other big challenge was I had to figure out a way. You know, he couldn't just get bitten by another vampire so far as becoming an origin, because that makes him ordinary, and he is not ordinary. He's fucking Dracula. He's, as I said, the OG vampire, the most, you know, I argue the most famous literary character of all time. All around the world, if you say the word Dracula, they have an image in their minds about what that is, you know. And so I had to come up with something extraordinary as the way that he is turned into a vampire. And if you've read book 1, you know it is some extraordinary method, you know.
And all that's true, and then you get lots of blood and gore and all these things, and so you're reading it, and I like thinking that what Matt has done is a really good. If he was an alchemist, he made French fries healthy. You know,
if only I could, my friend. If only.
Yeah. and so you're going through this, and it's exactly what I would want as a heavy metal reader in the late 70s. It's exactly what I would want. Yet I'm coming away with it with something more than what I expected. And
and that's, you know, the whole project was not only our deep love of all horror literature and Dracula and all that sort of stuff, but also an homage to the comics that meant a lot to us in the 70s, you know, very creepy and the line of horror comics that Marvel did, Son of Satan, Ghost Rider, Werewolf by Night, Dracula. So we really wanted to capture that flavor, you know. And I will say somebody that really helps us in that regard is our colorist, Jose Villarrubia, who really just brings kind of an old school vibe to it that just sings, just really
well,
makes
I work in such heavy lighting and backlighting, and I'm always using lighting. And sometimes I have to go back on a page and say, you know, I have to add some ink because I've so enjoyed Jose. I'm going, well, maybe I'll leave this area because I'm digging his choices, stuff I never thought of. And that's the fun part of comics is you get this second, third, fourth artist, depending on who you're working with. And so I'll go back and I say, no, I've got to, this is how I work. But there have been times where the story necessitated something more open, and that's where I'm uncomfortable. So I got to concentrate on.
But he does great stuff with that. Like for instance, in the first book, there's a scene in the woods. There's a scene in the woods with a wolf, and then Kelley has two negative shapes of branches just stretching across that panel. They're just white bare spaces, and Jose chose to color those like a pale blue. It's the last thing you would choose for most colorists, and it works so beautifully.
It does, and I trust that. When I'm drawing, I tend to think in terms of how it would look color-wise. When he gets back to me, even when it's something that that it's an agreement on, it's different, and I love that. It is because he'll go off like Matt says and do something completely different than what I was.
And he keeps it simple. He doesn't over render. He doesn't rely on a lot of computer tricks. You know, he uses colors. Yeah,
it's primary and it's applied as if he was watercoloring, and I love that.
And you know, I've talked about this before, but I've always kind of hated the various color jobs that have ended up on Kelley's work because people want to color him dark and moody, and I'm like, he's already done that. Yeah. That part's already there. He's rendered all the shadows. He's rendered all the side lighting and the drama. You know, what you need is something bright.
Yeah.
So and when Jose came on, I said, look, go look at Dario Argento's Suspiria and go look at Mario Bava's Black Sabbath, two horror movies that, you know, were lit up like pinball machines so far as their color palettes go, and yet are still incredibly creepy.
Yeah. I think, you know, it's like, the only thing I told Jose was think of a stained glass window, just bright.
Yeah, perfect.
And then Matt said, here's stuff to go look at. And then Matt also would say, as to me, he says, be aggressive, go for it, try. Don't worry about anything else. Just let's see what we get. And I remember the first, I don't know, batch he sent, it was 10, 12 pages or something. It knocked me out. I mean, it knocked me out the way Matt scripted, where I'm like going, something good is happening here. This is really good. I've worked on things where you're happy, but things where you kind of have to take a breather, you know, go have a cigar and just think, wow, is this really happening? Every time I get a batch back from Jose, that happens. Every time I see when everything's placed, that happens. And that you just know that has to translate.
And to kick that down the line one notch, it's the same with me. You know, I'm writing these scenes that I'm just like, oh, Kelley's gonna fucking kill it on this one, man. This is gonna be awesome. And it comes back and it's better. It's better than I was hoping. So
as a former
it's
theatrical,
so rewarding in every regards, you know.
As a former theatrical lighting designer, it's very rock and roll.
Like, yeah, very much. Yep.
Because you get that Congo blue and those reds. I mean, it feels like it was
70s
rock and roll.
I'm glad you say that because it feels like a musical thing to me. It feels like everyone gets together and it just works. Like it just works. And maybe it is the fact that we've all been doing this individually a long time. And I think this stuff rattled in the back of all our heads. And so when we get a chance to say, let's do this thing, and I feel honestly, this is the kind of thing that, yes, it's the sum of our influences, but it's brand new.
That too. Yeah. Yeah.
It's and I think that first starts with Matt. He wrote something that we're all familiar with, and yet I know Dracula, and I know these things. And when I'm doing this, I feel it's absolutely authentic, familiar, and brand new, and that is incredibly rare because if you're doing on Batman, you know, there's all these years of doing Batman, and you the best you can do is bring your own style to it. But when you can pull something out, is when Batman works. And it's the same thing with Dracula. It's something new. I don't think anyone's done what Matt's done. I think the level of scholarship on this
Yeah.
is exciting. It's not dry. It's not a
I've
dissertation.
absorbed a lot of Dracula. Yes.
Yeah, it's not this dry dissertation of the facts. It's a completely blood-soaked story, the way it should be. Yet it's all within canon.
And it gets more into the facts, right?
Yeah.
What sucked me in was finally we have something that's actually viewed a little bit more using the historical lens, and those things, those touchstones in Vlad's life that made him who he is and motivated him as a human, right?
I
And there was
think
a quote. There was a quote that Matt had: "To defeat the godless, one must become godless,"
yeah.
right? And so it goes back into his hatred for the Ottoman Empire when he was essentially traded and kept as collateral when he was young. And so there's a sense of patriotism that kind of motivates that zeal that he has, and then the personal quest for power, which creates this really mighty combo to kind of develop him into a character. And then you're diving into the Scholomance, which has always been really like fascinating to me, which I've thought of kind of the Hell's Hogwarts of Hermstead, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that's where you chose to take it, and that historical lens was really nice. Like I just hadn't
We
seen
have a
it.
nice little bit in the second part, which I won't spoiler too much, but where he talks about his captivity amongst the Turks when he was young, because
Okay.
he was part of a hostage exchange,
Right.
he and his brother, and it's a great moment. And Kelley, there again, I kind of wrote something, and Kelley added a visual punch that was just magnificent, and it's great. But to now like turn the focus toward the brides, book 2, here again I'm working off something that's extremely brief but extremely powerful and resonant in the novel, which is the appearance of these vampire women at the
Yeah.
castle, which only kind of in retrospect have become thought of as his brides. They're never
Yep.
referred to that particular term in the book itself. But again, that's such a searing narrative moment that they show up in almost every adaptation over the years, and they're only there for 3-4 pages, something like that,
Yep.
and so that's a big thing. And there's 3 of them, and there's not much background, if any, revealed about them, other than the fact that one of them seems to be a little more aristocratic or upper class than the other 2, because they defer to her defeating first, as if it's her right to go first. And so that just really opened this narrative well for me, that here were these 3 women. Well, I had to come up with 3 completely different women and make them real and make them accurate to their time period. So not contemporary women shoveled into that time frame. And I had to come up with 3 completely different reasons why Dracula would choose them to be part of his harem, and I think we really hit it. I think it's
I do. I know he has, because I found it fascinating. And I've let a few women read this, and I always preface it now. Horrible things are going to happen to them, and they're going to do horrible things. And they come out of this, and they love them. They love what Matt's done. They're fascinated by it. They're all okay with it. This is what they wanted, and I'm not saying I'm surprised, but I didn't get anything but other than just complete fascination with it. And I think that's the natural thing. Yes, we love Dracula and we question these things, but I think a lot of people that just come to it go, "Oh yeah, it's that thing where you go, I should have thought it, or I never. Oh, that's interesting. I should have looked into that more, thought about that more." Obviously, Stoker had his main thing he was trying to tell, but boy, they're not just window dressing. They are absolutely
yeah, and yet at the same time, there's, make no mistake, he does not, Dracula in no way thinks of these women as his equals. He's the lord of the manor, and that's
I think
accurate not only to the book but to the time period,
and that's true of anyone around him.
Yep.
He's in charge.
He's in charge. Yep.
Yeah. And
the other thing is to, the real balancing act here is to make you intrigued with Dracula and to make you kind of like him. And always remind you that he's an absolute monster. I refer to it as the Tony Soprano effect.
Okay.
How you really grew to love Tony, and yet every once in a while they would remind you, no, he's a fucking monster. Over and over and over again.
When I'm doing it, whenever you get into a character, no matter how much they're awful. You have to find something to identify with or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say that that's hard to do with this character. So what you do is you try to work on what your reaction would be to this. That's how I draw things, is the reaction to this guy that you never know what he's going to do next. And that is working for me, because he is like a time bomb. And you never, and it's not, Matt doesn't do it like, I'm going to do this thing. It's a casual thing sometimes. Other times it's more violent. Other times it's seductive. But
never forget, he was known as the Impaler.
Oh
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Congratulations on that anatomical correctness, by the way. Like, from the jump, I was like, yeah, we nailed it. Yeah, good job.
Matt was doing a lot of stuff for the first time, so I figured I have not seen that,
Yeah, nor have I. Well, you don't need Vlad to be portrayed as a vampire to see him as a monster. And vampires allow us, we're fascinated by them because we can mentally play with like more carnal, hedonistic versions of ourselves, right? So he helps us out with that. But you have to question, okay, well, he is a vampire. Is it like really his fault? So in fiction, that progression kind of tends to be one where they eventually mature and sort of face their own demons and the regrets of the past. So I was just curious, between the Impaler and the Brides, is Vlad going to cool his heels a little bit? Is the Brides going to be a more mature version?
No way.
Okay. All right.
There is a realization of he's gained all this remarkable power, which is what he sought, and yet power comes with limitations, specifically the power of vampirism. But we were talking the other day about the big archetypes in horror are Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman. And the seductive death is the vampire. The thing with no name is Frankenstein, and the rampaging beast within is the Wolfman. Mm-hmm. And the big difference is Frankenstein and the Wolfman both regret their circumstances. Dracula doesn't. Dracula's like there's no regrets. He's unapologetic about what he is.
Which makes him absolutely fascinating to see how he sees himself as I always draw him as him thinking himself as a highly moral man. He's not. He's amoral. He's completely unaware, and he's not some simple narcissist or anything like that. He feels he has a responsibility, something to live up to, right? And he's the guy, and he's going to do it. And the ends justify the means, into as far as you want to take that. He's the guy who can walk by an impaled woman and not give a damn.
Yeah, and that's only compounded in the Brides because the true Vlad the Impaler, the historical personage, was married twice, never had any kids, never had any offspring. So in the Brides, these women are the first things he's ever created, and he finds himself feeling a sense of responsibility to them that he didn't expect himself to have.
Gotcha.
Like, there again, he's still the boss. But he does feel some responsibility to them, as if they are, they're his harem.
When you read the real one, when he to drive off the Ottoman army and to put 20,000 guys to a stake in a crescent form, so when they come there, they don't even want to fight.
Right.
He didn't have any supernatural stuff when he was doing that.
That was part of the challenge of the first book as well.
Matt would take those things and say, okay, we know what he is.
Yeah.
So now his progression to be one isn't say, I want to. None of it is in Impaler. Do you see none of that lore of the vampire has been worked out yet? It develops with his curse, and each thing that he does turns on him. And it perfectly fits. Now, when you get to the Brides, that doesn't stop. What Matt does not stop. So It isn't a fairy tale. It isn't some kind of bad dream. It's like, hey, Matt does look. This is how it goes. This is what happens. It's horrible. Oh, and they're vampires. It's like,
Yeah,
that's
it's
great.
not, he's not a romantic figure. A lot of the film versions try to make him romantic,
Yeah.
and the Coppola version, Bram Stoker's Dracula, has this whole thing about Mina being the reincarnation of his lost love. And Coppola was quoted during the PR tours as saying, the original novel isn't a horror novel, it's a love story. No, it fucking isn't. There is no evidence of that in the book at all. That's a contemporary reinterpretation.
Yeah, the only lament
we try to keep it true to the book. He's a monster, and we never forget it.
No, he only laments for himself at times. He doesn't think of anyone else, and he's a man of his time, and that time is passing him by because he can't, which necessitates the brides. He's now everything's moving on,
and via the book, an eventual change of locale. Too.
Right, and so he is one of the beautiful things is it's not a curse in the sense on him that, okay, there it is, and we all know it. It develops with his existence, and it changes with his circumstance, and that is so good that Matt does not trap us in just the simple lore and what we know and whatever. What he's doing is, well, to me at least, it's like, well, this is what would happen. There is something changing, though he doesn't, and it's the world around him. There is something changing, and that's Dracula didn't start saying, God, I'm going to be lonely. He never did that. He said, I'm going to conquer, and I'm going to take, I'm going to do. And then when this starts, he's lonely. But he's not going to sit around and go, Matt doesn't write I'm so dull. He's not that. It's like, there's a lust there that isn't just blood.
He accepts it as his, what he knows his role is. There's a line in the second one, something about how being an aristocrat is being lonely, and camaraderie is the purview of soldiers and peasants.
And then to add to it, you're trapped in a castle with 3 women. A
remote
long time.
Yeah, and it does, and as it would happen if we were, it's not going to work out the way you think. So that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Matt doesn't play that.
Of course, the gals are going, when's dinner?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an obvious question, right?
Yeah.
You got to feed them. Well, when I was digging into and doing a little bit of background, historical perspective for the interview, it's come to light, I guess, that fairly recently that a lot of the brides were inspired by the 3 witches in Macbeth.
Sure.
From that manuscript found in Pennsylvania that now I think Paul Allen owns or something like that. Yeah. And Stoker's time at the Lyceum Theater and all that. And I guess Macbeth was one of the first plays that they did after Henry Irving bought it.
Yep. Yeah.
So did you take any of that history and inject the brides with any of that?
Just in the fact that, as in Macbeth, there's not much distinction between the 3 witches. You know what I mean? Right. So I had to come up with all that. And in fact, if anybody has seen Ethan Cohen's really remarkable recent film adaptation of Macbeth, the 3 witches are all played by one actress who triplicates herself at certain points in the camera work, and it's incredible. But the whole point there is the witches are meant to represent, even though Shakespeare never really describes it as such, but they're meant to represent the 3 stages of womanhood. Like a maiden, a matron, and a crone. And there again, here I had to come up with 3 completely different women, and we have 3 completely different women with 3 completely different motivations in their relationship with him, and why and how they become vampires and what they're like after they become vampires.
And it is something that I think is one of the most enjoyable things I've ever worked on, is the sequence of him courting. It is absolutely fascinating. I think it's one of the most interesting things, if not the most interesting thing that I've drawn, is this sequence of how each one of these women come to his life. Because as Matt said, they're very different and very different circumstances. And to see Vlad not just play the vampire card right off the bat, is he's going through how an aristocrat would do it, each at their own station, each each one having to respond differently to his wooing, all ending the same way. And Matt does this nice thing. Evil, as it's expressed and used, always diminishes those that do it. It just does. And every time it gets, even if they become more powerful, they become smaller. And it's interesting to see that each girl, that what those things are that bring him to him, he diminishes it. It starts becoming, they become less of that thing. Because
they lose a bit of their humanity.
Yes, and they until they're just about their lust. And he has all these big plans. Well, they don't. Their plans were small. Their needs were smaller, and that is interesting. And it does color who they are, and they are women of their time. So it's even more fascinating.
So you don't have a whole lot of mythology there that you have to adhere to in any way. They've been elaborated on in film, starting in 1931. So Kelly, I'm curious about form language for the three. Was there anything that inspired you? Was there anything that you already
Yeah,
knew? Yeah, I'm going to do this.
I knew I wanted to be influenced by nothing because Matt was creating them out of whole cloth. We knew
Okay.
who they were. And so what happened was I knew I couldn't go look at anything that had been done in film. I didn't want to look at anything in books, nothing. So I started basing it on women I knew. So
Okay.
I could have their body language.
Sure.
And I was very fortunate in reading this. That just sort of hit me. I was thinking, I need something new. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I can't, Matt's doing this thing. And so I wanted to follow that lead, just like, uh, uh, anything you want to live up to what you're getting, or at least give it a shot. And so I read one and I went, well, God, this seems like this, gal my wife knows, and then and that kept happening. So I read it over and I thought, it got to a point where I just wanted to spend a little time with them all and see how they move.
Yeah.
And just see how they hold themselves. And I kind of warned them. I said, if you don't want to, that's fine. I described it to them what Matt had done, and they all went for it. They all wanted. As soon as I said it, yes. And I went, well, no, horrible things are going to happen to you, and you're going to do horrible things. Are you okay with that? And not like I'm doing portraiture, but it's them.
Sure.
And it's how did I get them to move, how they hold themselves. And it really helped. And I don't normally do that. I can play act it in my head, but Matt had done something really unique here.
And that him bringing those individualistic inspirations to the three characters absolutely reflects what I was trying to do, which is to give it these three individual women. When you look at the cinematic interpretations, they don't really get individualized very much. They tend to be a collective unit, the three,
Yeah.
In the Lugosi version, they're all very ethereal. They all wear kind of the same white shroud. They move very slow and ghost-like. In the Christopher Lee versions, they tend to be very feral. Lots of low bodices and big teeth and lots of feral hunger. The BBC adaptation with Louis Jourdan, they're very cat-like. They flit around and they're laughing and teasing Jonathan Harker as they're trying to seduce him. And then, of course, in the Coppola one, they're just incredibly sexualized. They absolutely materialize out of the bed to draw Harker down. And at one point, one of them is very obviously feeding on his penis. And another one at one point is licking his bare nipple as it sprays this stream of blood up into her mouth, So all of those things didn't really give an individual identity to each of those women, but those are all very, very cool, fascinating interpretations of that that motif. So we tried to incorporate all of that and yet still do it our own unique way.
Yeah, I want to apologize. I'm hoping that I'll have to apologize to all the girls I used as models in this when it's done. I want it that bad. It's like, yeah, sorry. This is for art.
Yeah. I was going to ask if any of those you were part of the women that screened the book for you after you used them as models. So
I've let 2 of them actually read parts of the script because they're fascinated by it. And what they all wanted, and this is fascinating because I was very blatant about what Matt was doing. I showed them the first book. They all wanted to, it didn't matter. The worst, I said, no, really, it's bad. Look. And they go, ooh, more. So they kept getting more, and they all,
there's a certain Halloween mode that comes in there, right? They want to dress up as monsters, They know they're not monsters in their own real life. But,
it has been so helpful to me because I found something that was unique, and just how, like I said, how they talk, how they move, how they hold themselves. They became alive because Matt had them alive in a script, and that was usually when you read something and you go, well, this will be the tough part. That'll be that was the tough part to me, was just body language, not the locales, not all the stuff that should be hard was easy.
Okay.
But the acting they're doing, the stuff they do, Matt wrote them so differently, they had to be different. So I would say, well, you're kind of this girl and this kind of, they were fine. And I do think
actually give them names too.
Yes. And so now, I do think that it has made those pages where you see them introduced really, really work, because both Matt and I are on the same page on how making them that original. And frankly, it cranks up how horrifying they are and how horrified you are when you see what happens to them. It's
like I said, there's a touch of sadness there as well.
There
because
is.
They each
Well,
lose
there has to be
something. They each lose something, and it's real evident what it is too. And it is kind of one of the things that
Matt makes it bloody and erotic at the same time. So yes, you're sad, and then you go, wow. It's like so. But that's the story, and that's what they are. And it strips away. Matt has it be that this curse extends beyond him, and it absolutely works. So of course, like I said, the women who are based this on, they all dig this. So but I think it's entertaining, and like he said, a kind of, there's a tragedy to it. It's because they're women of their time, it becomes more fascinating to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about where they sort of land in time, because Coppola's interpretation really felt like we're just trying to go 90 miles the opposite direction from Victorian repression,
Yeah.
And of course, the vampire mythology in Stoker's book and everything was a response to it at that time, of that sexual repression and exploration of it, as they were able to do without going too far. So kind of where do they hit, kind of in a spectrum?
Well, as Kelly said, it's pretty. You got to figure this is Victorian England's one thing. This isn't taking place in Victorian England. This is taking place in the privacy of a castle high up on a mountaintop in Romania.
And they're not too repressed.
So
they
feel pretty free and entitled to just behave however the fuck they want.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're from Eastern Europe, 500 years ago, 400 years ago. So they're going to be according.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, Matt, you've hinted about a fourth bride in other interviews that I was reading. So
maybe there is. We'll see.
Okay. I was going to say, is that something you can like dance around without giving it away?
Dance around it. It's surprising. It'll be cool. Yeah. It's a neat development. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
and totally in keeping with what we lay down in this one, and
nothing new. Yeah,
everything that's gone before. So
nothing new. Everything Matt does is from Mr. Stoker, and then he expands upon it.
Okay. Okay. Well, as a student of the lore myself, a little bit of the historical, I'm curious about one thing that was in the Impaler, in the Scholomance lore itself, and that's the Weather Maker. So we have this gorgeously rendered Beast of the Apocalypse and the Sleeping Dragon that Kelley did beautifully. But as a graduating student, Vlad is supposed to ride, or perhaps in this case, it's metaphorical that he becomes the dragon. I was just curious about that.
He won't ride it until the end of days.
Okay. Okay.
Satan says my champion will ride out on this if he survives that long. When Satan's reign on Earth comes to fruition, then the beast will awaken, and supposedly his champion will. So you have to figure Satan's done this, once every 7 years, and he keeps one as his champion. So he's got some more champions lingering around. He's just kind of waiting to see which one lasts and which one ends up being the most heinous. The one that will represent his infernal desires the best. But yes, of course, there's the metaphor of the fact that he is known as the son of the dragon. Dracula is
right.
I just love that. I know none of his students tried to kill Satan. That's what I love. None of them took a shiv.
That was another big point in writing it. When I was getting towards the end, I was like, all right, he has to get rid of those other students somehow. Yeah. Oh, wait, he has to impale them. Yeah.
His go-to. His go-to. It isn't just cut their throat or poison them. It's like make them suffer.
Yeah. And that scene where he's out in the woods with that sled and he's chopping trees and you suddenly realize, oh, he's making a bunch of huge stakes.
That was
a great moment.
That is a great moment.
Well, you both have different covers for the projects. I'm curious here. Is there an inside bet on who will get more sales? There's got to be at least
Kelly's always getting more sales. Kelly's the artist on this. Mine's just to appeal to my particular fans. But Kelly's the main cover for.
I really don't care who does, as long as it's a lot of them.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I was a backer for Volume 1, and I'm a backer for Volume 2. I absolutely love.
I will say with when we come to our covers, we do talk about them quite a bit.
Yeah.
And try and hone them down. There's a precedent for what Dracula illustrations look like, and we wanted to get up close and become very symbolic. Like, so for instance, with the Brides, we both decided early on we don't see Dracula on the cover of the Brides. Yeah. It's the Brides,
Yeah.
And with the cover for number 1, we decided fangs, fucking focus on those fangs,
Sure.
For again, the reason that he's not really a vampire towards the end of the book.
Well, and Matt is more of a designer, so I prefer his input on that because I will illustrate, and then I'm afraid it'll look like every other cover that you do for a Batman thing. So,
and we have a good balance and relationship in that interchange. Similarly, the first page of both book 1 and book 2, we went through several different versions of. Yep. Kelley illustrated it, and I came back with, okay, from a storytelling point of view, here's my concerns about this imagery and why we should maybe.
And I look, I love being an illustrator, so I get inspired by the design thing that he does, and I figured, well, I'll do end papers on the book just for fun, just to see, and if no one wants them, that's fine. But I'm just thinking, when you open it, it would be better than just whatever matte finish inside, black or whatever. I just thought, oh, that'd be interesting, because some of the nice old volumes I have these kind of cool end papers.
And let me point out, you only get the end papers in the Kickstarter hardcover editions,
which is why we do those things.
This is a good opportunity to talk about the Dark Horse edition, which is coming out in
about a week or so.
I think it's the 23rd.
Something like that.
We always knew we wanted to try the Kickstarter model, it being such a new phase of the comic book marketplace. But at the same time, we knew we wanted to reach a bigger audience as well. So I've had this long running relationship with Dark Horse, and they were very happy to step in and release the trade paperback edition. And it's a very pretty edition. It has French flaps. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
But it does not have the end papers. So the only place to get the hardcover and the end papers is via the pledging to the Kickstarter campaigns.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any difference in size formatting at all?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Size. We knew also from the beginning that we wanted to go European album size.
Right.
Part of that was Dracula is so distinctly a European narrative, and I just always felt I had never seen Kelley work at that size, and I felt Kelley's art would really benefit by having that extra room to breathe. And he bitches about having to cut his own paper to size.
I had to buy a paper cutter. I had to buy all this paper, and I'm so stupid. I'm listening to Matt say, "I want to try this size. Here's the volume," and I'm going, "Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds great." And then you sit down and you realize you just can't go and pull a piece of paper. You can't you can't. So I order like this big stack, and then I go, "Well, I'll just cut it," and then I realize I can't cut it with that.
And we see the art on screen and everything, and it looks great. But then once I actually saw it in print, I was like, "Man, was this the right call?"
It is. It
really has that scope and that
it
area
is worth all the effort, and it does feel like you're getting something because you are getting something different from every aspect of it.
And it echoes creepy and eerie, and again, heavy metal and that era of comics that meant so much to both of us when we were.
Oh no! Look,
stages.
I'd love to get, in my silly head, I'd love to get like a foreign version in another language, because then it would be like, there we are. We've entered that realm with.
We are negotiating for that, by the way.
Yeah, and
very cool.
There you go. That's right. I forgot all about that. Okay. But that was always my thing, was like, one day when Matt and I are on our grand tour of Europe, there will be these editions for us to sign. That's the dream.
Nice. Well, you have 2 more volumes after The Brides, so that's assuming Kelley's wrists hold up, because like the workload has to be tremendous.
Well, what Matt has is a good ally on this. Is my wife is the one keeps saying, "You have to keep doing this," because she never cared about comics. Never, she was a civilian. And in this project, she's all of a sudden become an expert on what we should be doing. Just as a fan. It's charming, because I'll be sitting there and she'll just start dropping questions, and I know she's read this thing, really read it.
That's special.
Yeah, it is. And so, and that's unique for me, because normally we talk about everything but career stuff.
Yeah, me too. As Kelley's term, a civilian, my wife's a civilian too. So.
Yeah, and she has been for many years. It's just, at first it started because she saw me happy all the time. And I'm a happy guy, but she said, "No, you're happy when you're doing this. You're happy." And I said, "Well, there's a lot of stuff in here that makes me that way." So she goes, "Well, let me see." And I said, because I would say, "God, Matt did this thing. This is so different." She knows this stuff. She's read it. I mean, she got a degree in English literature, so she knows this stuff. And I hand it to her, and she comes back to me. She goes, "This is really good." And like for comics, this is really, and it wasn't that for comics thing. It was, this is just really good on its face.
And we have 4 volumes planned, because I have ideas for 4 volumes.
Yeah.
If we get to the end of volume 4 and all of a sudden I have more good ideas, we may end up doing more.
Look.
That's what I do, is sit around and think up ideas. So hopefully that will all come to fruition.
The best books, the best anything, are the ones where the tale grows in the telling. And that's it means anything can happen. Things will grow. And I appreciate that. I like that myself. I don't like being trapped by stuff. I don't want to be held accountable, as it were, for something. If I feel there's a better idea or a new angle we can take or something, Matt will figure out how to make it all stitch together. That's fine. That's what his job is. Mine is to simply make sure that what he says, that emotion is on the page, that emotional impact, however I can get that.
Yeah. Well, I won't try to pin you down, but I'm personally hoping that you get to explore Elizabeth Bathory at some point, given kind of their mutual family connection to the Order of the Dragon historically. So,
We'll see.
okay. Are there any other recommendations that either of you have to going through this process for people who are just interested in Dracula? Like book
you can't lose with the OG. The original novel is still really, really tremendous. I'm extremely excited by Robert Eggers' new upcoming version of Nosferatu, which is going to drop on Christmas Day this year.
Okay.
That strikes me as when he announced years ago, just after he had done The Witch, that he was thinking about doing a remake of Nosferatu. I thought, God, that guy could pull it off.
Yes,
That guy could really pull it off.
Yeah.
And you look at that would mean that you've got the 1922 F.W. Murnau version, considered one of, if not the greatest silent film of all time. Then you've got the Werner Herzog version in the 70s, which just so shockingly is absolutely as magnificent as the original, even though it's different in certain
You're
ways.
right. No, you're right. That is.
And then this one looks to be great too. Has there ever been a film done 3 times that each one would be judged as objectively great? Now I'm jumping the gun a little bit there on the Eggers version because we haven't seen it.
Yeah,
but
but
I'm still just kind of shocked.
the look of Nosferatu, you can say it though it's not adaptation. Salem's Lot uses it really well there too.
Yeah. It's influenced the appearance of vampires far more even than the Lugosi version.
I do. It's
not far more, but equally, because most of
it's
them
frightening.
and the Hungarian accent and the Widow's Peak and the cape and all that,
no,
which is not how he appears in the book at all.
That one with my kids who I've put through the ringer watching everything. That one always disturbed them. That the black and white. When I showed them the Herzog one, my youngest son, because if you remember, you see Bruno Ganz Harker rides off on the horse at the end. Like that was Herzog saying it won't end. So my son, who was he was a little kid at the time, loved it. Goes, all right, put in Nosferatu too, because he thought
right. He grew up in the era when, of course, there's sequels.
Yeah, there's got to be a sequel.
He was like about 8 or 9, and he loved the Herzog one. And he said, "Okay, number 2, I'm ready. Let's go." I said, "I'm sorry, that's how it ends." He still hopes that we get big enough, Matt, to complain to Herzog about no Nosferatu 2.
Wow.
I want to point out too, the first one is where we get the first instance of sunlight being deadly to vampires. Previously to that, they didn't like the sun and they tended to stay out of it. But Dracula walks around in the daylight. He's just not as powerful. Yeah. He can't transubstantiate into a mist or change shape into a bat or a wolf.
And thus
he's not as physically powerful. His power is diminished during the day, but sunlight does not burn him to a crisp, which has become the norm in almost every vampire narrative ever since Nosferatu. You look at something
it just makes him vulnerable to his enemies far more.
Yeah. You look at something like Near Dark, where they have that great shootout in the motel, and as the bullet holes are coming through the wall, the real danger is the sunlight streaming through the bullet holes. But again, in the original Vampire Legends, that's not the case. Carmilla, one of the first contemporary vampire tales, she moves around during the daylight. So that's just an interesting, yet another addition to the mythos from that very first screen adaptation.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, everyone get those pledges in, folks. This book is absolutely fantastic. The first one I love. I honestly think it's Kelly's.
Got a lot of cool merch this time around. Let me get this.
Yeah. The boys have
hats. We have a whole swath of really great T-shirts. We didn't want to go too overboard with that kind of thing on the first one because we were an unproven entity.
Yeah.
And we really wanted to make sure everything shipped on time. It did, and now we have a proven track record, and we felt entitled to do some merch. And the T-shirts look great. The hats are totally cool. God,
I love the hats. Well, I'll throw a link in the show notes to make it easy for everyone to find it, so they don't have to hunt. And Matt, what else you got cooking? I saw some more Grendel coming down the pipe.
Yeah, well, an ongoing Grendel thing. It's a long story arc called Devil's Crucible that Dark Horse is releasing in 4-issue chunks per year. So the 4th issue of the first series, so Devil's Crucible Defiance, comes out today, in fact. And then next summer will be the next one, which is called Devil's Crucible Sedition, and then there'll be 2 more parts after that. I'm writing and drawing. It's the direct sequel. It's being colored by my son, Brennan, who's my regular colorist. It's the direct sequel to the previous Grendel Prime tale, Devil's Odyssey. It's what happens when Grendel Prime comes back to Earth from his sojourn into space, which didn't pan out. And and we find out things have been kind of turned on their ear, and there's lots of vampires. So I'm deep. I'm up to my knees, my balls, my brain in vampires these days. So
well, if you'll allow me a little bit here, I brought a visual aid. I don't
oh
know
yeah,
the last time you saw one of those, but that was recently unearthed from the most cliched place ever, which was my parents' attic. So it's from back in the day when I worked in 3 comic book shops in my teens, and I'm a huge Grendel fan, and
You know,
luckily.
I loved those books back then, and Matt did not tell me. DC sent it to me. They got it ahead of time, and there was an issue. Matt used to do the letters page, and there was an issue where he had given me a great review for Batman, just doing regular Batman, and that meant a lot to DC when they saw that. I remember their marketing people said, "We got to do something with this because this is really good," and they said, "Do you know Matt?" And I had to question for a minute. Do I say I do and diminish it for him, or do I lie and say I've never heard of Matt Wagner? Who is this guy?"
Yeah.
So
I know which one I would have chosen.
Yeah. So I said, well, I know people who know Matt. That's what I said, because they were so excited. For me, one of the things that I like is that Matt does keep doing that, and that it has its legacy. And it's one of those things where it again keeps growing. It's still as good as it always was, and it keeps going. That part of it kind of makes you comforted in the world of comics now. It changes so much and everything,
Right.
that there's something that naturally grows, has its own thing.
Well, and part of it, as I established from the beginning, was I was going to keep changing it.
Yeah, it has its own life.
Yeah. Well, as a fan, I am very, very happy to see it continuing to be developed and expanded upon. Kelly, what about you? I thought I saw some recent Detective Comics variant
Well,
covers that dropped, and
those were I did a big stack of covers and stuff like that a
yeah.
while ago, and they just released some. They said, "Can you send us 10 or 12 of them, and you just do
Okay.
them when you can." Um,
Yeah, how about that? Their outline to Kelly is just do whatever you want and we'll print it. How
well,
about
what
That's
I
amazing.
did what I did was I kind of told a story. I didn't tell them. I was kind of telling a little story with each cover, but because it wasn't to relate, they didn't even have an idea what they were going to do on the inside. No, most of what I'm doing is Dracula. The most I can say is they just re-released the Batman Dracula stuff I did. I have to write some essays. I don't have to draw anything really, but I have to do some essays and remembrances of Len Wein for Swamp Thing. They're doing a big book of his Swamp Thing. The stuff I had done with him. So
which Jose did the color restoration
yeah,
on, right?
yes.
Yeah.
So so that's a big volume of stuff, but that's not work intensive. That's my homework at night, Matt. I Lynn sits there and I kind of tell her and she types. But no, this is a big thing. So as soon as I'm done with Brides, I go on to, I don't know what he's going to call it, Dracula London or something. I have no idea, but that's my placement title now. Is people will say, "What are you doing next?" Well, I'm doing Brides, and then I think it's Dracula London, but I don't know the title yet. I'm just calling it
Just call it book 3. That'll do.
book 3.
Yeah.
But I said that it's going to be, these are big, and they are where my real happy heart is. So I don't mind that at all. It's I think what's great is hearing people say, I think this might be your best work, when you're at this end of my career rather than the other side.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I utterly concur.
But I'll always say story. It's always story. And you can, there's nothing more punishing in that you feel you did a good job and nobody gave a damn because the story is just not there, or it's mediocre, or it just didn't catch. This is one of those where I do feel the story totally pumps up. So I never know what's going to happen, and that's the best thing. I don't rely on any of my former skills. It's just I've got to follow this. And so Matt will throw stuff and I go, okay, how do I figure this out, or how do I do it? But
needless to say, he manages.
It's because it's that exciting. I walk around thinking, like, you method act for me. And so to me, I'm thinking like, what would Vlad feel, or what would he think, or how would people react to him? I love Matt writes him with frustration, because that I am good at that one. And there's just this frustration, you know. Even when he gets what he wants, it's not what he thinks he wants. So it just, these things draw themselves.
Yeah, you're probably too humble to call yourself a master, but coming from the perspective of a visual artist myself, once you get to that point of comfort and you know just what you're doing and you're in the zone and you don't have to think about it.
Well, there's two guys. There's this one that's talking to you, and the one who sits at the drawing board.
Yeah.
I have reconciled that fact, because my family has all looked at me like, oh God, here's that one who sits at the table, because I'll be consumed with it while cooking. I'll be
Okay.
thinking or something, and I'll be frustrated with something not going right or whatever. And I always think they're making fun of me. And then I finally had to reconcile. No, that's true. That's very true. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of people, but but they're two guys. And this guy doesn't think of anything up. He just reacts. He's a fanboy. The other
Okay.
one, he will go in there and do that. Now I sound like the Hulk or something, but you know what I mean. I never worry when I can't think of something like this, because I can trust that will come on the paper. It will happen there. Matt sets me up really well, you know, and at that point, what I'll do is, what's my tagline is that two things really. There's Stanley Kubrick's great adage of, you either care or you don't. So I have no trouble with putting in a long day. You either care or you don't. And Matt's, I'm doing something new. So when I sit there, I go, I can't just rely on my tropes and my tricks and my stuff. I've got to think of something different. And or I've got to think of at least presenting it with that verve that Matt has. Matt has a great underlying confidence in his story. And I'm not saying the one sitting here. I mean, when he writes it, it's just, this is it. And you have to rise to that. You know, you have to rise to that. And I think the most frustrating thing I had on this is when on the first one, we had it virtually done, and I'm like, oh man, I can't fucking show this to anyone. This is driving me nuts.
Yeah, we did the first one kind of far in advance.
You know, normally if you're working for a publisher, it's
the turnover on comics is pretty fast. You get a reaction because it's not long after finish till it's in the
well, and even so, it's in house, so your editors are seeing it, and I'll always hear from various people at DC. They'll always get a hold of me, but this one, no one was seeing it.
Yeah,
just I would hear.
That was indeed frustrating. Yeah.
No, and then I get these tantalizing bits from Rob Lee, who works on everything, saying, "I think this is the best book I'm lettering right now," and that's all he would say. He would just drop that. I think this is the best one. And Matt, he doesn't give compliments too much, but he will tell me that I think this is the best thing I've done, or I'm on. So, but then you hear that and you're really high, and you realize, well, Matt's seen it, Rob's seen it, and my wife has seen it, and that's it. You know. There's a little sadness when it goes out, because then the whole world gets to own it.
Sure.
But
so far the response has been great.
I have never had a response like this.
Yeah.
Frankly, I've never had a response.
Yeah,
I can measure it against great responses, like career-changing responses. I haven't had one like this though. It has been that good.
I mean, I really love seeing the sample pages that you've been posting on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it this week. So yeah. So as a fan, I'm excited for sure.
Well, and not to, I think they're terrific, but they're the lesser when we get to the greater.
Of course.
And you can't, like Matt says, we can't give it away. We can't give it away.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, I'll publish, I go, well, this is just storytelling, or this is just whatever. But they have been getting a lot of good reaction. Like, what you don't want to hear is, oh, it's not as good as the first, or you're losing. It's not. This as Matt amped it up, and it's not amping it up. What I think is it grows in the telling.
Yeah.
Because I went back and looked at the first one. I hadn't looked at it for a while, and I was like going, wow, we did good on this, man. This is good. But I hadn't looked at it for quite some time.
Yeah.
And And
which is healthy. Which is healthy. You don't want to dwell on stuff.
No, you don't. I don't really. I go forward, go forward, go forward.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, you have the Brides that is funding now. I'll have the link in the show notes. You have the Impaler that is dropping with Dark Horse. You said the 20.
I think it's a week from today. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So everybody look out for that. Kelly and Matt, I appreciate you both coming on the show so much. It's kind of a comic stream come true for the young 18-year-old. I know that makes us feel all old, but you know,
we've, as Kelly says, we've reconciled to that part.
Yeah. I have. Well, let's just be glad I'm working on someone undead at my age.
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
there you go. There you go.
All right.
Well,
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.